the... Well, it's here. Does this break everything? Okay, so people may remember this from previous years. This is our debate, and it tends to be like organised chaos. So I'm here to try and keep order. That's my job, and to keep time. In previous years, we've had a dreadful alarm bell that goes off at the end of time, but apparently we can't turn it up, so it's really quiet this year. So,
but I'm going to make a noise.
So Sarah's going to jump up and down.
Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah,
so
Sarah is our alarm. So the way this is going to work is, in a moment, I'm going to introduce our panel that we have before you, and they're going to be talking, proposing the motion, which is that there is no evidence that therapeutic communities are effective, and this team are going to be opposing that. So what will happen is that Steve will talk for 5 minutes, and then I think you're going to speak. Vicky's going to talk for 5 minutes, okay, and then Maria will respond for 5 minutes, and then Nick will respond for 5 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions. We'll take a couple of questions at a time, and then I'll ask the panel if they wish to respond. We won't have very long for that section, okay? And then after that, there will just be 2 minutes for Steve, and then 2 minutes for Vicky for any final comments before we have a final vote. Did I say at the beginning we'd have a vote before we started that? I think Rex is nodding that I should have said that. So anyway, so we'll have a vote before we start. So in a moment, we're going to have a vote. So just to introduce our panel to you. So we have Steve Pearce over on my right here. He's chair of TCT, Communities and Oxford TC. Then we have Marya Hemmings here, who is a director of TCTC on the board and also studying at Birmingham University currently, previously in prisons. Then on my left here, we have Vicky Gavin, therapy manager at HMP Send, previously at the retreat in York. And then in the end here, we have Nick Manning, president of TCTC Research Group and professor of sociology at Nottingham, the Institute of Mental Health. Okay, so what we need to do is to have our vote. So the motion is there is no evidence that therapeutic communities are effective. Okay, so we want to see, what do you want, hands up, Sarah? Is that our
That's the
team?
one, yeah.
If you agree that there is no evidence that therapeutic communities are effective, please can you raise your hand?
Just a point of order.
Yes?
We should have room to abstain.
Yes, so I'm going to ask for those that agree, for those that don't know either way or abstain, and for those that do not agree. So absolutely, yes, that's what we will be doing. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to see those that agree that there is no evidence that therapeutic communities are effective. Hands up, please. Oh.
Yay!
Who are our counters here? Two.
Natalie, Josie, and Salima.
Okay, thank you. For those who don't know or abstain from this vote?
So 5 here.
And so is Gary. We've got people voting twice.
You can only vote once. Only vote once. Okay, so how many do we have over here?
25 it is altogether.
Thank you.
25 without Gary, who's
And those that don't agree with the motion?
This side. Oh God, I'm going to have to put that down. 25, 36. 4. Oh, and what about the two?
They've included us, yeah.
65.
65, yeah?
So have you got that? So 3, 4, 65 against 25 don't know.
Correct. Okay, is our timer ready?
Oh, God, yeah, sorry, I'm mixing and matching my own presentations here. It is.
Okay, Steve, off you go.
Start.
Thank you very much, John. I'm not standing here to tell you that TCs don't work. I've worked in TCs for 15 years, and let me tell you, TCs work. I'm here to tell you something quite different. I'm here to tell you that there is no good evidence that TCs work. Now, you'll have seen in the news a couple of weeks ago a big scandal around Tamiflu. Roche, which is an evil big pharma company, has sold our country £500 million worth of Tamiflu on the basis of opaque research. They claim that it stops people going into hospital and shortens the duration of illness. And when the Cochrane Collaboration, which is an independent body funded by the government, looked at their data, they realized that actually, if they'd given you paracetamol instead, it would have had a similar effect. Roche, of course, went on the Radio 4 programs and says, oh, no, because we've got other data that you haven't seen yet. And by the way, the Cochrane Collaboration had a lot of trouble getting the data out of Roche. The point about this debacle is that until you have an independent scrutineer of data, you don't know what your data says. So what does the Cochrane Collaboration say about TC data? Well, there's a number of different areas in which TC data has been collected. The one that the Cochrane Collaboration has done a review on is in addictions TCs. The review is in 2008, and the review finds that there are problems with the evidence and it is inconclusive. Effectively, what the Cochrane Collaboration is saying is there is no reliable evidence for addictions TCs. What about my field? What about in personality disorder? So in 2013, there was a review article by Linda Gask, who's a professor of primary care in Manchester. I know this article well. I was one of the peer reviewers. And in the original article, it said, the evidence for TCs in personality disorder is inconclusive. The other reviewer changed that to, there is no evidence. So there's your second piece of independent information. Is this still working? But you might find that our opponents here reference a famous study from 1999, of which Professor Manning was one of the authors. Now, when I try and persuade my children, I've got 3 children, 9, 11, and 13. When I try and persuade them to watch a film from before 2005, they complain, they moan. I tried to get them to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. We didn't get more than 5 minutes in because they know it's not realistic, because the CGI is rubbish. Even the way that the opening credits happen, label it as ancient. Now, this study that you may have quoted at you is ancient. Some of the studies that it talks about are from the 1950s.
Like me.
Like Nick, thank you. Who here was alive in the 1950s? Put your hands up. Exactly. I don't think there's too much more to be said about that. Now, what about the areas of children's TCs and learning disability TCs? Well, you may know that I'm involved in the journal, the TC Journal, and we have an article under review at the moment. This is slightly cheating because our opponents won't have had access to this, but I am going to quote it to you. This is by a professor from Jerusalem. In this research, comparison groups are rarely matched or even randomly chosen. And there is indeed, in fact, no generally accepted definition of residential childcare, therapeutic childcare. So I think I have shown you altogether that the level of evidence that is available is low. As I say, it doesn't mean they don't work. I'm talking about generally accepted levels of scientific evidence. Why is it important to have these generally accepted levels? Why is it important to have randomized trials? So I could go on about this, but I'm going to very briefly describe to you a situation where, if you imagine for a moment that you're working in a prison, and the first prisoner comes to see you, and he's rather grumpy, and he's got his arms crossed, and he grunts at you, and he doesn't really answer your questions, and you say, do you even want to go into the TC? I'm not bothered. So you turn him down. Next person comes along. He's very anxious to get into the TC. He wants to change. He's identified some of his behaviors. He's ready to go. He goes in. You don't randomize them, but 2 years later, you look at their recidivism rates. You look at how many crimes they've committed, and you find the one who went into the TC has committed hardly any crimes, and the one who didn't go into the TC has gone straight back to crime. What's that due to? Is it due to the TC, or is it due to selection bias? That's why you have to randomise. It's a lack of randomised studies that is the Achilles heel, and that's why you have to vote against this motion. Thank you. For the motion.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And over to you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. So I do work in a prison, and actually I work in the only women's prison therapeutic community in the whole world, as far as I know, a democratic therapeutic community, working with women who have committed serious crimes of violence. So they're a very unusual group of women, and there is no way that you'll ever get a statistically significant randomized controlled trial with that very small group, but very important group in society to try and understand. So I'm going to look at the evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, not in terms of research, but the other evidence, the evidence that's in this room, the evidence that we know of our own eyes and what we see. And, you know, I leave it to you how compelling this is. And we were talking about TC leadership a bit earlier on today. And the kind of TC leadership I like is when the women solve a problem for me and tell me I needn't worry about something. So our governor at HMP Send had this brilliant idea that every single department within the prison should do a display or some sort of presentation promoting the equalities agenda. And I brought this to the women in the community, and they batted it around for a while, and the staff were a bit worried that the women might take it in some sort of tokenistic way and not really understand about the importance of the equalities agenda. But eventually, after it'd been knocking around for about, well, best part of a year probably, the chair of the community came to me and said, Vicky, you don't need to worry about that anymore, we've got it sorted. We're going to do something about age. We're going to have some charities come in and we're going to raise some money for them. We're going to bring in the Mulberry Bush School, Therapeutic Community for Children, because we really care about them, their children, and we're mummies who've lost our children, so we want to do something for children. And we're going to bring in Age Concern for the other end of the age spectrum. And so-and-so's knitting raffle prizes. She's knitting teddy bears. So-and-so else has devised a quiz. Somebody else is doing a tombola or something. And so they don't worry about it. It's all going to happen. We've got the hall booked. It's fine. And the staff and the women did everything. I did absolutely nothing. Then on Tuesday, the day came when the officers went to the gate and invited in our visitors from Age Concern in Woking. These two women came in quaking, and they said to the officer, so what are these prisoners in for then? And the officer said, oh, most of them are doing life sentences for murder. Oh, I've never been in a prison before. And a therapist came in from the Mulberry Bush as well. She's a little bit less phased, but nevertheless hadn't been in a prison before. They came in, they spent the afternoon with the women. The women did their quizzes and their raffles and tombolas and all these sort of things. And they'd done some fantastic displays with all sorts of very thought-provoking ideas that are important to them about age. And the officer took the two women from Age Concern out, and they were saying, we want to do something for older people and older women in prison. That was fantastic. It was so inspiring. I didn't know prison would be like this. And the Mulberry Bush, you know, yes, we've got more TC links, and it feels really important. So anyway, the quantitative bit of the evidence that we gained from this was that those women raised £500 for these two charities, and these are women who earn very little money, so £500 between them collectively is an enormous amount of their income, and they were thrilled to have done so well and raised such a lot of money. And the qualitative part of the evidence is the next day in the therapy groups. They were saying things like, in the outside world, I don't think people think we're the nicest people, do they? But actually, do you know, I feel better about myself today. And I was really pleased I spoke to the therapist from the Mulberry Bush, and she was going, yeah, go on. And I was getting more of the staff to buy my cakes, you know. They felt much better about themselves for doing something for others, and they felt better about themselves for doing something collectively as a group. and they had achieved something really tremendous. Then in the small therapy groups, the women talked about the loss of their own children. And they talked about the children who've been compulsorily adopted because they're serving life sentences, the terminations of pregnancy that they'd had, the children that they don't see now just because they're behind bars. And there was a tremendous feeling of compassion for one another and a real opening up.
You have to stop.
Oh, no! I was going to tell you about the large group too, but it's evident.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. Maria, over to you.
Well, thank you, Vicky, for that. Although that was eloquently said, and it is part of being in a therapeutic community, it's that kind of explanation of what TCs are about, which gives us the reputations of being hippies and being on beanbags, and we're not able to put numbers together or give any hard evidence whatsoever. So that's exactly the kind of point that me and Steve are putting forward. And it's not only about we're rubbish at the kind of saying what hard evidence we can do, but it's also we can't even collect it very well. So we're onto a non-starter right from the beginning because we don't collect it. And then when we do collect it, then it's a bit skewed. So we're much more reliant on old research that tells us how great everybody's doing, but we're less likely to look at how many people actually drop out within the first 3 months where we haven't got that much data, or drop out right at the end and we don't include them. So we're a bit ingenuous with how we decide success is based on. Also, it all depends on what we class as being success. So if someone was a heroin addict and then they went down to marijuana, some TCs would say that's a success. Or in prisons, if somebody came in for an offence but they went out and committed a lesser offence, is that success? And we wouldn't tolerate that in any other industries. We wouldn't say, oh, well, that's nearly okay. So why would we accept it within a TC? So we need to be able to demonstrate that actually we are effective, and we're effective in terms of people do change and they stop their behaviour, not that we take other evidences from other things to kind of pad that out, because that doesn't work and it gives us a bad reputation. Also, we're very selective, or we can be said to selective. So we pick the people that are going to work, and people would say gaining more self-esteem, feeling good about yourself, are all things that as long as you have a nice environment, then you can do that anyway. So why would a TC be any special than just a nice comfy environment with nice wallpaper and flowers and making it look pretty? They'll be nice anyway. The other thing is that it costs a lot. So not only do we have the research to say, give us more money, but there are other things coming into the field that is overtaken. So sexy treatments like CBT, DBT, they know how to give evidence. They know how to present it. They know how to sell it. And they're able to argue their cases. They're cheaper, they're shorter duration, they have a good success rate. We can't really say that in TCs, and we can if we collected the right stuff at the right time. So Sarah's presentation right at the beginning demonstrated just how skewed kind of collecting data and then interpreting is that. So if the community of communities can't sort out the data that we're giving them, then how on earth are we going to actually demonstrate that to the rest of the world and have it under scrutiny? I haven't been throwing cabbages yet. I'm really impressed. Also, it could be said that everything that was in a TC is just structured for that particular environment, and it doesn't actually work outside of that. So it's almost got cult-like status. You know, everybody follows the line. They change their behaviour just because it's better and it's easier, but it's artificial. It doesn't commute to the rest of the world. So you've got people that are doing life sentences. So they're in prison for 20 years. You don't know whether they're going to commit their offence for another 20 years. So you can say that's a success. But that's only because they're contained within 4 walls. So that's not really an argument to say that they've actually reduced their risk. Also, it's secretive, and we tend to do that on purpose, and it gives people the impression that we actually don't want to tell them, or we think that they're going to be too thick to actually understand what it is that we actually do. So then they get a bit annoyed to begin with. And then when we say, oh yeah, well we do, look how effective it is, what they can say to us is that all of the TCs that have been pioneers, so Northfield, the Henderson, they're all shut. And they would say to us, if it's so successful, if it is so rich in evidence for people to change, then why have they shut down? Because the research should at least have kept them going. No, I'm still alive. That's brilliant. So that is what I would use as evidence to say that our research needs to be more professional and be able to actually kick doors down and say, this is why we work, and we can actually demonstrate it how you want us to demonstrate it.
Get off!
Thank you, Maria. And now
I'll give
finally,
you time
Nick,
to get here, Nick.
your 5 minutes.
So the first thing I have to say is, trust me, I'm a professor. There have actually, in the last 10 years, been 7 systematic reviews of therapeutic communities. We have in my institute the only decent Cochrane mental health collaboration, which is in schizophrenia. I do know how to do systematic reviews. I did the first one of these 7. And the evidence on 5 of them is that therapeutic communities work reasonably well, and the evidence on 2 of them is it makes no difference. The evidence on most brands of psychotherapy, if you look at the literature, is they work, do I have to use this? No. That they work quite well. So the evidence that is actually, Steve's wrong, the evidence is there and it's in favour of therapeutic communities. The point I want to make really is that the randomized controlled trial as a way of understanding therapeutic communities and providing evidence itself is fundamentally extremely flawed. And just to give you 2 examples, conventional RCTs, which are funded by the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research, and the HTA, very many of them do not, or suffer from the kind of sample bias which Maria mentioned, the selectivity of bias, that patients are just added onto the list when they turn up. Qualitative research has shown that a lot of the blindedness that's used, in other words, not knowing whether you're getting the control or the active ingredients, is often broken by the staff. Many of the staff know what they're giving. So the fantasy that randomization actually gets rid of the kind of biases that Steve's talking about actually doesn't, it's not used in practice. And the scandalous use of RCTs, of course, is, as he said, by the biosciences industry, which have systematically distorted results, suppressed data, suppressed publications in favour of drugs that they want to sell us. The randomized controlled trial, in other words, is a deeply flawed project, even though actually these systematic reviews show that therapeutic communities work quite well. If you really want to take a wider view of evidence, the better thing to do is to ask, how do you get people who have resources and power to hear what we do? In other words, it's not what we know, it's what do they hear. And if you looked at the paper by Gary on the recovery movement, and you look at the early years of the therapeutic community movement, it's obvious that politicians and health service managers and others are swayed by things other than the evidence. They say they use evidence, but they don't actually. If you look at heart surgery, or most major surgical interventions, there have been no randomized controlled trials of them. If you go into hospital and you get surgery, it will not be on the basis of evidence generated by randomized controlled trials, but what's it based on? Personal and clinical experience and the passed on wisdom from one clinician to another. So even if you strive to have randomized controlled trials, you're seeking for something which is a will-o'-the-wisp and is not actually how the world works. And I would recommend that you look at things like other sorts of interventions in the education field, in the health, in the social justice field, in poverty alleviation studies and so on. Randomized controlled trials are not used to establish evidence in these areas. And my argument is that randomized controlled trials are used by the strong as a way of keeping the weak away from resources. So we're asked increasingly to produce, one trial won't work, we'll have to do 10 of them with a systematic review, in addition to the systematic reviews we've already had before we're allowed. The review that we produced, the first one, we couldn't get published in the UK. We were told, even though it was funded by the Centre for Reviews and Dissemination at the University of York, and it was done under their rubric and with their supervision, we were told that the trials that we'd found weren't properly randomized. They weren't real randomized controlled trials. We published in America in the end because the establishment, the British Journal of Psychiatry, wouldn't let us publish these findings. So there's a huge amount of politics around evidence, what it is and how it's produced. And we need to be aware of that much wider view. So I think there is evidence for the therapeutic community, but we can't get people to listen to the kind of evidence we have. So I would urge you to reject, well, accept it or whatever it is, which way round are we?
Reject.
Accept that.
Anyway, I think there is evidence, so we have to reject the motion. The 3 people who voted in favour of it have to change their minds now, please. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. So now we've got a few minutes for questions to our panel. So have we got microphones out there, or are people shouting?
There's one, yeah. There's one. Josie's. Okay.
Lovely. Okay, so we'll take 2 questions at a time and then ask the panel to respond. So there's one question in the middle over here. Is there another question?
One in the middle?
In the middle just here. Thank you.
I'd be interested to know if there's been any ongoing research into the effectiveness of CBT after a year, after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years, and after 5 years, and how that would compare to the effectiveness of being in a TC.
Thank you. And chap just behind you there, Jesse.
Yeah, I abstain because I didn't know what you meant by evidence. But if you don't regard RCT as the gold standard evidence, what do you regard as
Okay. Panel, who wants to go first?
Shall I answer about the CBT? Yeah, I mean, there is evidence that CBT is effective. I don't think it's been run over the period of time that you required, up to 5 years, and I don't think there's been a comparison between CBT and therapeutic communities. But there is short-term evidence that it works, and that it saves money, actually, yeah. It is short-term, yeah. That's correct.
Okay. Steve, were you wanting to say something?
So the question was, if not RCT, then what? And I think precisely. Thank you, and good night.
Okay. 2
Are
more.
you going to excuse me? Can I help?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Because in the prison service, actually, they, in NOMS, they've just spent a great deal of care and attention on this issue with the prison TCs, and they've recognised that an RCT isn't an appropriate form of research for TCs. So that's come out recently. Sarah Bridgeland's emailed us all and told us we're not going to do an RCT. They're going to do some other kind of comparison trial for the efficacy of the TCs in men's prisons. But they're not including the women's prison because we've got a slightly different assessment process.
Thank you. Okay, time for 2 more questions. There was one.
Hold on, can I just reply to that?
Okay, just hold on a second.
However, if you go to the NICE guidelines, in March 2014, they published that RCT should be used in therapeutic communities, especially with antisocial personality disorders.
So opinions differ. Are we going to have an RCT to find out which opinion should be considered
That would be a
more
start with it.
appropriate?
Start with that.
Lovely. 2 more questions.
Fight.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience here?
Cheers. There's a recent debate in the Maudsley debate regarding the status of CBT for psychosis, about the effectiveness of the evidence. And it's been a long-running debate, and even with 35 plus randomised controlled trials of CBT for psychosis, experts still disagree as to whether there's good evidence. So really just to answer that even in a highly researched therapy like CBT with supposedly evidence, there's still disagreements.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is a question or not, but Bob Hinchwood has just written this book called I think it's Research on the Couch, about trying to find out how you can, without doing this sort of scientific research, how you can judge the efficacy of psychotherapy. And he's using case study as a way to do that. And he's developing a sort of an academic argument about how to do that within psychotherapy. Isn't there a way that therapeutic communities can design their own methodology, which is in keeping with therapeutic community ethos, so that it's built out of the particular discipline that we're in, and it's not something sort of intruding upon it?
Okay, thank you, Chris. Who would like to respond first to those two questions?
So shall I say, so the point, I think it's more a point about the RCTs of CBT and schizophrenia, wasn't it? And that's exactly right. You see, it's not that RCTs solve the problem. It's not that they simplify the question. It's that they give you high quality, more reliable indicators for the direction of travel. And I think if you look at the literature around CBT for schizophrenia, I think it's quite clear the jury's out. And this relates to the question asked in the back about long-term outcomes, because the long-term outcomes for people who have schizophrenia and have had CBT are not better after 2 years than people who haven't had it. And in fact, the cost-effectiveness data in the short term is very equivocal. So it's not that RCTs will always give you an answer. It's that even if the answer is, we're not sure, it's a more reliable answer, in my view.
Can I just, yes, I think by buying into the world of RCTs, you're buying into a way of looking at the world which you can't win. And I think the thing is to be circumspect about that. It is the game that's in town, and those people control the money by trying to persuade commissioners and others that's how they should spend their money. But actually, enormous amounts of money are spent in health and social care on activities which will never be trialled and cannot be trialled. And I think we are... I don't think running randomized controlled trials is going to, if you like, save therapeutic communities from the chop, if that's what's going to happen to them. And it won't necessarily lead to expansion of hundreds of them if you have a successful trial. So I think if I would advise people, if they're worried about the future of therapeutic communities, and that's why the evidence counts, because we know they work, so we don't need to know it for that reason, is that you use other avenues, particularly politics and influence, as a way of keeping services open. It's much more effective, and I think it's quicker acting than using RCTs.
Okay, I think we need to move to final comments now. Sorry, I'm aware there are other questions, but I think we need to move on. So we've now got two opportunities, one opportunity for Steve, and then I think, Vicky, you're going to speak just for 2 minutes, just final comments. Steve.
Well, they're very smooth, aren't they? Vicky gave you the kind of teddy bears and hand-knitted quilts. And Nick gave you that smooth, professorial, silver tongue thing, you know. Trust me, I'm a professor. Ever heard trust me, I'm a professor? I never heard that. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Now, that's a bit different, isn't it? But, you know, we're not bad people, me and Maria. We're not hard. We're arguing for hard evidence, but we're not hard people. We're not against beanbags and flowers and hippies, particularly looking at our opponents. In fact, the 1960s is slightly less long ago than the 1950s, isn't it? And you see, I would agree with a lot of things, actually, that have been said. I would agree that if you look at the people who are in TCs and working away in TCs, if you look at the effects on their lives, if you look at the effects on the people around them, it's profound. And I think that is a type of evidence. But I don't think it's the kind of evidence we're talking about here. I also agree that RCTs are an expression of power, and I think that Nick is correct, that they are used to exclude people from the levers of power, and they are misused by Big Pharma. But I don't think that that invalidates the core difficulties with alternative approaches. And statistically, and I think that, you know, you do an RCT, and if you get the methodology wrong, or if it's not completely transparent, then you can still end up with problems. And I think that's very clear. But the core question, I think, has already been asked, and it was from the gentleman up here: if not RCTs, then what? And finally, I'd like to say there is only one TC board member on this panel, and she is on my side, so vote for.
Thank you, Steve. And Vicky, your 2 minutes.
We have to be very thankful for that TC board member being such a good actress, don't we? Because I couldn't have done it, I can tell you. And she was definitely running out of things to say at the end there. But on a more serious point, I think some of this is about the nature of what we consider to be scientific evidence. Sigmund Freud would have considered himself a scientist without any randomised controlled trials. And there have been many, many scientists and scientific endeavours where the efficacy and the value of their work hasn't been measured by RCTs, and it is completely commercially and politically motivated in quite a sinister way, actually, this focus on RCTs. We know in psychotherapy that psychotherapy works where there's good therapeutic alliance. And if there's one thing therapeutic communities really do, is they provide a great number of people, both peers as well as professionals, to have a therapeutic alliance with and to help you in your journey to recovery. And that's the thing that they have in common, and that's what we do very well. And there's loads and loads and loads of evidence stretching back right back to the 1940s, even before I was born. And just because people were around in the past, may I say, doesn't mean that they weren't people. And there's plenty of human evidence for the efficacy of TCs, as you all very well know, and as they've admitted over and over and over again.
Thank you. Okay, so we're now going to vote again. Okay, so we'll do it in the same order. Okay, so there has been a movement towards opposing the motion, but clearly both teams did an extremely good job because you managed to persuade an increasing number to move away from their abstentions. So well done to both sides.